The New York Rangers score a dramatic overtime victory at the Stadium Series in New Jersey. John Chik of Locked On Rangers is here to talk about that, the Blake Wheeler injury, and all things Rangers next on the Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. We just had one of the more exciting Stadium Series games in recent memory, and John Chik of Locked On New York Rangers is here to talk about that. John, your first reaction to that dramatic comeback and the overtime win for the Rangers?
Well, Gus, or Gil, excuse me, I mentioned this to you just a second ago, but I said to you that I think we're going to have to do a two-part episode here for Locked On New York Rangers, and I kind of stand by that because this was absolutely wild. Kind of as you mentioned before we hit record there. Basically, it was almost like three different games in one, and my head's still kind of spinning. I mean, as we're recording this, it ended maybe like 15 minutes ago or whatever it was, but I mean, Artemi Panarin in the overtime strengthening his case for, possible MVP consideration. I don't know if he's going to win it, but I mean, his importance to this Ranger team cannot possibly be understated. So just awesome stuff there. And just absolutely wild. It was not looking good for a long time in this game. Not sure the Rangers, based on how they played for the first, the 60 minutes there, not sure they always deserved to win this one, but I mean, they did rally from a 3-goal hole. They were down by 2 goals with 4 minutes left or whatever it was. So I think you got to take that. And I think even in an imperfect performance, you got to give them some props for coming back the way they did in this one.
Your thoughts on Peter Laviolette's gamble to pull the goalie down by 2 goals on a power play with about 4.5 minutes left in the game, and it paid off. He pulled the goalie both times, scored both times on the power play.
Yeah, you don't see that every day. There's times where I do think NHL coaches at times can be like a little too trigger happy when it comes to pulling the goalie. I don't like seeing, my team, say like they're down by a goal and there's like 2:30 to go. I don't want to see the goalie pulled because if you give up an empty net goal and there's like still 2:15 to go, it's like, man, we had all this time left to get the equalizer. But in the case of this game, down by 2 goals and going up in the power play, I think it made sense, even though there were like 5 minutes left at that point or however much time was left, because you got to make it happen. If you're down by 1 goal, you can't do that. But down by 2, obviously, you got to force the issue a little bit. So that worked. And then a little bit later, believe, if I'm remembering this correctly, without looking at my notes, that they got back on the power play and once again pulled the goalie, and it once again worked. And, kind of the same deal there. I mean, at that point, you've already scored a goal with the goalie pulled. Maybe kind of go back to the well and try it again. And obviously by that point, time was starting to dwindle a little bit. So yeah, obviously, it worked out, and it's just great to see the Rangers able to capitalize there. And the power play has really been struggling lately. And, hopefully that, the subplot of this whole thing, this big comeback, is that maybe they're getting that unit back to where it needs to be as well. Cause they were like 1 for 22 before they put in a few today.
Always helps to face the 32nd best penalty kill in the NHL. But hopefully from a Ranger standpoint, they can get some momentum from that. Your thoughts on the overall experience, the weekend in New Jersey, the way the NHL handled this game and just the pageantry of it all?
Yeah, overall, I thought it was good. I mean, these outdoor games are always a lot of fun. It just kind of breaks up the monotony, I guess you could say, of the 82-game season. I mean, I love hockey. I'll watch no matter what arena or what stadium they're in, or indoors, outdoors, however they want to play the game. But it's always cool watching these games. And my only complaint, I think, is that camera that ESPN uses that kind of like sways back and forth and makes you feel like you're getting like the kind of nauseousness you would get on a plane. I could do without that, but other than that, man, I thought everything was cool. The post-game handshakes I thought were a nice touch. And yeah, I mean, it's a special event every year, when they do these handful of outdoor games. And Rangers now 5-0. So I don't know, maybe they need more outdoor games on the schedule going forward. We'll see how they do it.
Before this game started, obviously Blake Wheeler lost for the season, probably for the New York Rangers, although we don't have an official estimate of how long he's going to be out. But how does this affect the Rangers, and how do they respond to it, both personnel-wise and emotionally?
Yeah, emotionally, I mean, you can tell, Blake Wheeler obviously hasn't been there long, just signed with them this offseason, but, Chris Kreider was like choked up trying to talk about it and like kind of kept his answers short because I don't think he wanted to go into too much detail. Jacob Trouba, him and Blake Wheeler close from their days in Winnipeg. Trouba, it was tough on him, I think. Laviolette said the same thing. You can tell very well-liked, very well-respected player in that locker room. And just unfortunate, man. It's just one of those things that can happen. It wasn't even like a vicious hit or a dirty hit or anything like that, but, his skate just kind of got caught underneath him and bent the way that it's not supposed to. And next thing you know, it's a pretty gruesome injury and out for the year probably. They've left the door ever so slightly cracked as far as maybe that he could return a little bit later. Like if the Rangers make a deep postseason run, it's possible he could get back in there. But, whether that happens or not, obviously I think this means that right wing, which I think has mostly been the Rangers' biggest need all season, is just that much more so. It also means, there's been some chatter of maybe the Rangers could field offers for Kaapo Kakko. I think now that you're down a right winger, a position where you're already thin, I don't think there's any way that they're going to even consider moving Kaapo Kakko, especially with him starting to play a little bit better recently as well. So, I mean, that's kind of where things stand. It was kind of a toss-up for me between center and right wing as far as the Rangers' biggest need at the deadline. But with Johnny Brodzinski kind of emerging a little bit as the third-line center, you combine that with Blake Wheeler's not going to be available anymore. Yeah, to me, that the scales have tipped back toward right wing. And I'll be very surprised if the Rangers don't add at least one right winger between now and the deadline.
So you mentioned a right wing. How do you expect the Rangers to handle this upcoming trade deadline? What are they willing to give up? How much cap room do they have? And who are some of the targets you expect them to go after?
Yeah, they have a little bit more cap room now because obviously, Philip Hedl dealing with the recurring concussions, and he's now on LTIR. And off the top of my head, I want to say his cap hit is around like $4.2 million. It's somewhere in that ballpark. So that gives the Rangers a little bit more flexibility there as far as like players that they could look to acquire. I mean, a name that I feel like it's happened in the past, but Jordan Eberle's name comes up every now and then. That's a possibility. I think a guy that Ranger fans would love to see is Frank Vetrano. Although, this time around, they traded for him a couple of years ago. All they had to give up was a 4th-round pick, and they're going to have to give up quite a bit more if they want him back. Maybe a reunion with Vladimir Tarasenko could even make some sense. But I'm kind of hoping that, I mean, you hope that they do something, but, who's this year's Frank Vetrano? Who's that guy that's on a team right now that, maybe doesn't have a big role, or maybe he doesn't fit the system, or something's just not quite clicking where, Drury can go out and find that player and give away next to nothing to get him. And then he comes in and maybe isn't a superstar, but, a steady contributing member of this team. That's kind of what I've been trying to figure out on my show. And I've done a couple of deep dives, but still kind of looking. And I'm sure the Rangers themselves are still doing their due diligence and, trying to find the right players to bring in at the deadline. But I think it has to be a right winger for sure. You got to get at least one right winger.
And who's expendable at this point, or are they going to look more to give up draft picks and prospects?
I think it would be draft picks. If you look at kind of Chris Drury's history, he seems to favor trading away draft picks more so than prospects. The Rangers have some really good prospects, but I can't imagine for a second that they would trade Gabe Perreault, who they just drafted and is just setting college hockey on fire right now. Brent Hoffman is a 1st-round pick from a few years ago. He just puts up video game numbers at like every level that he plays at. He was actually up with the Rangers for 3 games earlier this season. Maybe he even becomes an option to be called back up. We'll see. But yeah, I mean, maybe like some mid-level prospects or draft picks. Again, he seems more willing to part with draft picks than prospects. And I'm not even sure if the Ranger 1st-round draft pick is available this year, because there was that whole story, and I'm not sure if it's even true or not, but it was suggested that Dolan might not want to trade the 1st-round pick because the draft is in the Sphere next year, which he owns, and he wants the Rangers to be a part of that, which is the most ridiculous reason for not doing something of like anything ever. But again, I don't know if that's true or not. Another reporter came out and refuted that claim. So we'll see, man. But I think if something significant is going to be on the move, the Rangers give something up, I think it'll be draft picks as opposed to prospects or certainly anybody on the current roster.
John, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, so you can find this podcast. It's on every audio platform that you can name. Wherever you're listening to this or watching this, you can find Locked On Rangers there as well. You can find me on Twitter at jchik17, and then you've got the Twitter handle of the podcast itself at LO_NY_Rangers. So yeah, definitely give me a follow, say hi. Always love talking Ranger hockey.
John, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, Gil. Really appreciate it.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at Camino Consulting. How would you like to get to know somebody better in an hour than you would in a year? Understanding one another better prevents small misunderstandings from becoming big, ongoing fights. Well, after providing more than 20 years in mid-sized businesses, helping management groups navigate conflict and onboarding new employees, Camino is now offering a digital seminar for families and couples. Did your Valentine's gift of tickets to the game not go over as well as you hoped? Get the couples and family online seminar for 25% off for the month of February using the discount code Locked On. Again, that is discount code Locked On for 25% off for the rest of the month at www.caminoconsulting.ca, or mention Locked On when reaching out for a business seminar and receive the first 5 profiles free. Again, that's www.caminoconsulting.ca. Check it out today.